We arrived in Savannah late in the afternoon, the golden hour of the day casting everything in a warm, almost eerie glow. The city is full of history, every street seemingly lined with buildings that have stories to tell. Our Airbnb townhouse was located just on the edge of the historic district, a few blocks from the famous squares and cobblestone streets. The place was old, like really old, but beautifully restored. Brick walls, creaky wooden floors, and large windows that let in an abundance of light. The host greeted us with a warm smile, explaining the house's history. She mentioned that it had been built in the early 1800s, once serving as a Civil War infirmary. She even gave us a little tour before leaving us to settle in. First, it all felt perfect. Savannah was beautiful, the townhouse charming, and we were excited to be there. We spent the evening wandering through the nearby streets, taking in the sights, and returning to the townhouse around 9 p.m., tired but happy. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of distant cars and soft chatter drifted through the open windows. It was the kind of peaceful evening you can only get in a city that's centuries old. That first night, we settled into bed in the spacious upstairs room. The bed was large, with crisp, white sheets that smelled fresh and clean. I remember thinking how nice it was to be away from the chaos of life, just me and my partner, in a quiet house in a city that felt like stepping back in time. We turned off the lights, closed the windows, and fell asleep almost immediately. But then, around midnight, I woke up. It wasn't the usual middle-of-the-night jolt of waking up in an unfamiliar place. It was something else, something unsettling. There was a noise coming from the walls. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. Old houses do that, right? They creak, groan, and sigh in the night. But this was different. It was a faint, muffled sound, like someone was crying. At first, I brushed it off, rolled over, and tried to go back to sleep. My partner was still asleep beside me, so I didn't want to disturb them. But then, it happened again. A sob, a low, guttural sound that sent a chill down my spine. It sounded like someone in pain, someone trapped in sorrow. I sat up in bed, straining my ears to listen. It was coming from the walls. My heart started to race. I glanced at my partner. They were still sound asleep, their back to me, oblivious to the sound I was hearing. I stared at the walls for a moment, wondering if I should wake them up, but I didn't. Maybe it was just the pipes, I told myself. Old houses have weird noises. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, trying to ignore it. The sobbing continued for a while, and eventually, it faded. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just the house. I closed my eyes, willing myself to relax and sleep. The next morning, I didn't mention it. I figured it was a fluke, just some weird noise from the house. Nothing to worry about. My partner was in a good mood, chatting about the sights we'd see in Savannah that day, so I didn't want to bring up anything that might put a damper on our trip. We spent the whole day out, walking around the city, visiting the historic sites, and enjoying the weather. The sobbing was forgotten, and by the time we got back to the townhouse in the evening, I was too tired to think about it. That night, we went to bed at the usual time. The house was quieter than before, the sounds of the street outside muffled by the thick brick walls. I fell asleep quickly, trying to shake off the tension of the previous night. I was nearly asleep when I heard it again, this time louder. A scream, followed by the same sobbing, but this time, it was more desperate. It felt like someone was in agony, and the noise was coming from inside the walls. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do. I reached over to my partner and gently shook them awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. They mumbled something, still half asleep. "What? That noise?" I said, a little louder. "It sounds like someone is crying, screaming." My partner sat up, rubbing their eyes. "It's just the house," they said, sounding annoyed. "Old houses make weird sounds." But I knew it wasn't just the house. It was too clear, too distinct. I could hear the emotion in the noise, the terror in the sobs. We listened for a few more minutes, but the sound didn't stop. It continued for a while, each sob and scream like a sharp pin in the quiet of the night. Finally, I gave up. I grabbed my phone and texted the host, asking if there had been any previous complaints about strange noises in the house. I didn't get a response right away. My partner tried to comfort me, saying it was probably the pipes or maybe someone else in the building, though we knew no one else was supposed to be staying in the townhouse. We just laid there in silence, listening to the unsettling noises until they finally faded away. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. We went out again, this time to explore some of the older squares in Savannah. The whole day, I was on edge. I kept thinking about the noise, about the way it sounded, how real it felt. We visited a few historical sites, learning more about the Civil War and the history of Savannah, but my mind kept drifting back to the townhouse. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. That night, it happened again. But this time, it was different. I woke up in the middle of the night, again. This time, I didn't just hear sobbing. I heard something else, something even more unsettling. A voice, a whisper, coming from the vent in our room. I couldn't make out the words at first, but it sounded like someone was speaking directly into my ear. My heart thudded in my chest as I sat up in bed, wide awake now. The whisper continued, like someone was right next to me, though no one was there. It was as if the air in the room had shifted, and now there was something inside the walls. I glanced at my partner, still asleep beside me, oblivious to the sound. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone again, sending another text to the host. Please tell me what's going on with the house. There's something happening at night. I don't know if it's the pipes or what, but it's freaking me out. The host didn't respond until the morning. When I saw her message, I was already awake, my mind spinning. She said, "I'm sorry you're hearing those noises. It's normal. This house has been here for a long time and has quite a history. It was once used as an infirmary during the Civil War, and things like that happen sometimes. Nothing to worry about, though. It's just part of the house's charm." Normal? I couldn't believe what I was reading. The house was beautiful, but the noises? They didn't feel like charm. They felt like something much darker. I showed my partner the message, but they just shrugged it off, saying it was probably just a weird coincidence. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. We tried to continue with our trip, but the sounds at night were unbearable. The sobbing, the screams, the whispers. It was constant, growing louder each night. We even checked the vents, hoping it was just something simple like a loose vent cover or a draft. But there was nothing. On the third night, we couldn't take it anymore. We packed our bags and checked out early, leaving the townhouse before the sun even rose. We didn't even wait to hear back from the host, who never apologized or gave any explanation for the noises beyond her charm comment. We just wanted to leave. Once we got back home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I searched for any mention of similar experiences from other people who had stayed in the townhouse, and that's when I found it. A Reddit thread. There were 3 other guests who had shared similar stories, each one describing the same terrifying sounds, the sobbing, the whispers. One person mentioned they had heard the sounds at night and had checked out early, just like we did. It made me feel a little less crazy, but also more disturbed. I didn't know what was going on in that townhouse, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't just the house settling. It wasn't just the pipes. There was something else happening there, something that couldn't be explained away by charm or history. And to this day, I've never been able to shake the feeling that there's something we never understood about that place. Something dark and hidden, buried deep within the walls. It was early October when I booked the Airbnb. Work had been stressful, and I just needed a break. The listing was a quiet cabin tucked away in a small mountain town. The photos showed a cozy place with wood paneling, a stone fireplace, and big windows that looked out over tall pines. It looked peaceful. The reviews were all good. People said the host was friendly and helpful but gave you privacy. It seemed like exactly what I needed. I arrived a little after 4 p.m. It was a long drive, winding up mountain roads, and by the time I pulled up to the cabin, the sun was getting low. The air was crisp. A man was already waiting on the front porch, late 40s maybe, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, gray in his beard. He smiled as I got out and came down the steps to greet me. He introduced himself as the host, said he just wanted to welcome me and show me around before heading out. He was polite. He walked me through the place, pointing out where the towels were, how to use the wood stove, where to find extra blankets. The place looked just like the pictures. He handed me the key and said to make myself at home. Then he left, walking down the gravel driveway toward an old pickup. I spent the evening settling in, made some tea, sat on the couch reading. It was quiet out there, no neighbors in sight. You could hear the wind moving through the trees. Around 9:30, I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom when I heard a knock at the door. Not loud, just a regular knock like anyone else might do. I walked over, toothbrush still in hand, and looked out the side window. It was the same man, the guy who showed me around earlier. He was standing on the porch, hands in his pockets. I opened the door just a bit and asked what was going on. He looked surprised to see me. Then he asked who I was and why I was in his house. That threw me off. I told him I was staying here through Airbnb. He said he was the actual host and that he'd just gotten a message that someone was inside his property. I stood there trying to make sense of it, heart starting to pick up speed. He seemed serious, not angry, just confused. I told him another man had shown me around earlier. I described him. Same guy. He shook his head and said that wasn't him. Said he hadn't been up here in a week. He looked me over again like trying to decide if I was telling the truth. Then he said he was going to call the police. I let him. I wasn't sure what else to do. I hadn't done anything wrong. I stood out on the porch with him, both of us waiting in silence. He paced a little, muttered to himself. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out. One talked to him, the other to me. I explained everything, the booking, the man who met me, the key, the walkthrough. The officer nodded, took notes. They asked for the listing info, so I showed them on my phone. Everything looked legit. My payment had gone through. The reservation showed the right address. The officer asked if I still had the key. I handed it to him. He looked it over, then motioned for the other officer. They talked to the man some more. I stood there feeling cold, confused, like I'd done something wrong without knowing it. Finally, one of the officers told me that I wasn't in trouble. But there was a situation. He said someone had been copying key codes from lockboxes, pretending to be hosts. It had happened at other properties around the county. Sometimes the guy would meet the guests, act like everything was normal, and then come back later after they left and clean the place out. The real host said he had been away visiting family for the week. He hadn't even known someone was staying here until Airbnb messaged him, asking if he needed help with check-in since the guest had arrived. The police believed the man who met me earlier had watched the cabin, maybe even had the real code before the host changed it. Maybe he had a way to reset the box. They said he likely showed up right after I pulled in, trying to act fast so it wouldn't look suspicious. He probably figured I'd stay a night or two, then leave, and he'd come back when it was empty. That explained why he was so helpful, why he gave me a key and left so quickly. He wanted me to feel like everything was normal. The officers asked me to stay nearby so they could file a report. They wanted to know everything. What he looked like, what he said, if I'd noticed anything strange. I gave them all the details I could remember. They thanked me, said I was lucky he hadn't come back during the night or while I was gone. I hadn't even locked the door since I thought I was alone up here. They offered to help me find another place to stay. But the real host said I could remain at the cabin if I wanted. He'd stay nearby in his RV for the night just in case. I wasn't sure at first, but he seemed genuinely upset about what had happened. I could tell it rattled him too. I stayed the night, though I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the wood or rustle outside made me sit up. I kept the lights on. I kept my phone close. The next morning, the sheriff's office called to follow up. They told me the same man had been reported at 2 other properties in the past month. Same method, wait for the booking, show up early, pretend to be the host, then return later to rob the place. One time, he had taken everything from the cabin, TV, furniture, even the sheets. They were building a case and said my report helped a lot. I stayed another night since I had nowhere else to go. But the host installed a new lockbox and even gave me a security code to set on the front door. He brought over coffee and apologized again. said it had never happened before. After that, I left early the next morning. Drove home in silence, playing the whole thing over in my head again and again. What if he had come back in the night? What if he wasn't just looking to rob the place? A few weeks later, I got an email from the sheriff's department. They'd caught the guy. Someone spotted him near another rental property and called it in. He had fake keys, printouts of Airbnb listings, even clothes in his car to help him look the part. They connected him to 5 separate break-ins. My info helped confirm his method. It felt strange knowing I'd been part of something like that. I'd walked into it, trusted someone who acted just like a normal host. He knew exactly what to say and do. And if the real owner hadn't come back when he did, I probably never would have known. I still use Airbnb sometimes, but I'm way more careful now. I double-check the host's identity. I confirm codes through the app, not in person. I never assume the person I'm talking to is who they say they are, not until I've seen proof. And I always lock the door. That trip was supposed to be a break from stress. A few quiet days in the woods. Instead, it made me realize how easily we trust strangers. How quickly things can go wrong when someone knows how to play the part. It wasn't some ghost story or creepy legend. It was just a man pretending, and that made it worse, because it was real. I booked the cabin because I needed a break. Everything had been building up. Work stress, my phone constantly buzzing, city noise leaking into my apartment windows even at night. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere still. The listing said secluded and rustic, nestled out in the rural hills of northern New Mexico. The photos showed a small wooden cabin, surrounded by dry brush and a backdrop of low, sun-baked hills. The kind of place where you hear your own thoughts a little clearer. I booked it for 5 nights. Getting there was a bit of a drive. After I passed the last gas station, my phone signal dropped and the road got worse. Paved turned into cracked gravel, then into dirt. The GPS cut out, so I followed the printed directions the host emailed me just in case. There were no other houses nearby, just empty land, scrubby plants, and a sky so big it made you feel small. I stopped once to make sure I hadn't missed a turn, and the silence outside the car hit me like a wall. No wind, no birds, just the sound of my engine cooling after I shut it off. Eventually, I found the turnoff. A narrow trail barely wider than my car, marked only by an old wooden post with no writing on it. The cabin sat about a quarter mile down that trail. It was just like the photos. A little A-frame, weathered gray wood, 1 window in front, an old porch swing hanging by rusted chains. Dust clung to the edges of the windows and the air smelled dry and warm, like sun-baked pine and cracked earth. I unpacked my things slowly, already feeling the stillness settle into my bones. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, and just 1 bar of signal if I stood by the front steps and held my phone up. Inside, it was simple. Just a small kitchen, a couch, a wood-burning stove, a bathroom with old pipes, and a lofted bed above everything else. There was a guest logbook on the little table next to a stack of faded magazines, and a few board games missing half their pieces. The host left a note in the front cover of the logbook, handwritten, welcoming guests and asking them to jot down their stay. That first evening, I made some tea, sat on the porch, and watched the sun bleed out behind the hills. The silence was deep. No bugs, no crickets, no rustling wind. Just the occasional crack of settling wood from the cabin. It should have been peaceful, and in a way it was, but also, it felt too quiet, like something was missing. But I told myself that's just what real silence is like when you're not used to it. Later that night, with nothing else to do, I started reading through the logbook. The early entries were the usual kind. Families from out of state, couples celebrating anniversaries, solo travelers like me wanting to unplug. Most of them commented on the beauty of the stars at night or the peace and quiet. But after about halfway through the book, something shifted. The entries suddenly started looking the same. Same shaky handwriting. No names, no dates. Just notes like, "They're watching again tonight. Don't go into the brush. Stay inside. I thought I could leave today, but they always find me." The handwriting was uneven, sometimes barely legible. There were pages of just the same sentence written over and over. I can't sleep. They're close. I flipped through them quickly, feeling my pulse pick up. At least 24 entries, all clearly from the same person. All recent, at least from the last couple years based on the paper and ink. Nothing else in the cabin looked like anyone had stayed long-term. Sheets were fresh. Towels were folded. Food cabinet had only sealed items. The fridge was empty except for a few small bottles of water and a box of baking soda in the back. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the cabin felt louder than it should have. I left the small lamp on downstairs, just to keep the place from going pitch black. I kept thinking about that handwriting, about someone out here alone writing those things over and over. In the morning, I tried to brush it off. I told myself someone with issues probably stayed here too long. Maybe they didn't have access to meds. Maybe they were off the grid on purpose. I ate a granola bar, drank some water, and decided to explore the property a little, just to settle my nerves. The land behind the cabin sloped down into a dry gully, then back up into low hills covered in brush and old junipers. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, taking in the sun, trying to enjoy the quiet. I found deer tracks in the dust, saw a few lizards, nothing else. Still no birds, though, which felt odd. You'd expect at least a hawk or something overhead. As I turned to head back, I caught sight of something off to the side. It was barely visible through the undergrowth, metal, maybe. I pushed my way through dry branches and found it. A trailer, an old, rusted-out RV half swallowed by weeds and branches. The windows were blacked out. The side door was closed but looked warped, like it hadn't been opened in years. But there were signs someone had been there recently. A broken chair lay just outside, its legs splintered but not rotted. A rusted pot sat on a flat rock like someone used it to cook. And there were footprints, faint but there, human, barefoot or in socks, pressed into the dry dirt. I stood there a long time, staring at that trailer, trying to decide what to do. Something about it felt wrong. Not just old or forgotten, but wrong. I didn't go inside. I turned and walked back to the cabin, faster than before. I didn't like how my shoulders felt, like something might tap me from behind if I slowed down. I didn't like how the trees looked at the edge of my vision, like they were just slightly not right, and I hated how quiet it still was. No wind, no insects, no sounds at all. Back inside, I packed my things. It was only my second day, but I'd seen enough. Whatever the hell was going on out here, I didn't want to know more. I didn't want to poke it or understand it or write it down in a logbook. I didn't even turn off the lights, just grabbed everything, shoved it into my bag, and locked the door behind me. When I got to my car, I noticed something else. There were smears of dirt across the back window. Not full handprints, just smudges, like someone had leaned their fingers there lightly or dragged them in a lazy curve. I couldn't remember if they'd been there when I arrived. Maybe they were, maybe not. Driving out, I didn't feel calm until I hit pavement again. Once the dirt road gave way to proper highway, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I stopped at the first gas station I saw and used their bathroom just to be in a place with people, fluorescent lights, and background noise. I didn't contact the host, didn't leave a review. I didn't want to explain what I saw or justify leaving early. I just wanted to forget about it. Back home, I looked up the listing a week later. It was still active. Same photos, same description, still advertised as secluded and rustic. But the guest book wasn't mentioned anywhere, and there was no trailer in any of the photos. I didn't try to report it. I thought about it, but what would I even say? That I found a trailer in the woods and some weird notes in a book? I still think about it sometimes. I still wonder who wrote all those entries. I wonder how long they stayed out there. I wonder if they ever really left. But mostly, I'm just glad I didn't stay longer. That I listened to the feeling in my gut when it told me to go. Because out there, in that silence, with all that emptiness around me, it didn't feel like I was alone. It felt like something had been waiting, and I wasn't going to be the next one writing in that book. I flew into Florida for a 3-day business trip. I was tired from the flight, but relieved to finally get off the plane. It was hot and sticky outside, the kind of heat that wraps around you the second you step outside an air-conditioned building. I picked up my rental car, drove to the Airbnb I had booked a few weeks earlier. It was a small, one-bedroom apartment just outside Tampa, tucked behind a row of palm trees, with a driveway lined with cracked concrete. From the outside, the place looked clean enough: modest, beige siding, white shutters, and a cheap welcome mat in front of the door. It looked lived in, but I figured it was probably used often by people like me. Travelers, workers passing through, people who needed a place to sleep for a few nights. The host had messaged me the door code earlier that morning. Punched it in and the lock clicked. Inside, it was cool and smelled faintly of air freshener mixed with something musty, like old furniture or a damp towel that had dried halfway. The living room was small. A couch with frayed edges sat under a window covered with heavy curtains. The TV mounted to the wall had a slight tilt, and the table underneath it looked like it had survived a college dorm. The kitchen was clean, with some leftover spices and a few dishes in the cupboards. The bedroom was down a short hallway. It had a queen bed, nightstands on either side, a lamp with a crooked shade, and an old wooden dresser with a mirror that had water spots. Everything looked standard. A little worn down, sure, but nothing unusual for a rental that probably saw dozens of guests every year. I set my suitcase down on the bed, opened it, and started unpacking the essentials. I changed into a fresh shirt, splashed water on my face, and sat down on the bed to check my emails. As I leaned back, staring up at the ceiling, I noticed something. There was a smoke detector right above the bed. That's not unusual. Smoke detectors are common. But what caught my eye was the little red blinking light. It blinked steadily, in perfect rhythm. Blink, blink, blink. I stared at it for a long time. The blink seemed too regular, too bright. It was different than the soft pulsing light most detectors have when they're just on standby. This one looked deliberate. I stood up on the bed, curious, and got close to it. The casing was slightly different too. It was white, but the plastic had a sheen that reminded me more of electronics than of safety equipment. I looked closer and noticed something that made my stomach drop. Behind the tiny holes in the front panel, I could just barely make out a lens. A small, circular black dot, buried inside the plastic. It was a camera. My skin went cold. I stepped down from the bed, backed up, and looked at it again from across the room. It was aimed directly at the bed. Not the dresser, not the whole room, just the bed. I didn't want to believe it at first. I stood there for several minutes, thinking maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just an unusual design, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Something felt wrong. I grabbed one of the dining room chairs, pulled it into the bedroom, climbed up again, and reached for the detector. It was screwed in tight, but I managed to twist it loose. I pulled it down, and sure enough, there was a small camera inside. A micro SD card was slotted into the back, partially hidden under wires. I sat there holding the thing in my hand, trying to process what it meant. Someone had set up a camera to record people in this room. Maybe everyone who had stayed here. Maybe me if I hadn't noticed it. I felt sick. My skin was crawling. I checked around the room, suddenly paranoid. I looked behind the TV, under the bed, inside the vents, behind the mirror. I didn't find anything else obvious, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. I packed my bag quickly. I didn't care that it was already getting dark. I was not staying there. I checked out, locked the door behind me, and drove to a hotel I knew was reputable. Cost more, but I didn't care. I needed to be somewhere that felt safe. Once I was checked in, I sat on the edge of the bed in the hotel room, holding the fake smoke detector in my lap. I didn't know what to do with it at first. Part of me wanted to throw it in the trash and pretend none of this happened. But another part of me knew I couldn't do that. Someone had put this here. Someone had been watching strangers sleep, or worse. I contacted Airbnb through the app, explained what I had found, and attached photos. It took a few hours to get a response, and when they finally did reply, the tone was overly professional, almost like a copy-paste answer. They said they were taking the matter seriously and would look into the host's account. The next day, I got a call from someone on their trust and safety team. They asked me a few questions: how I found the camera, where it was placed, whether I had touched it. I explained everything. They thanked me for bringing it to their attention. That was it. But I wasn't satisfied. Pushed for more. I asked if they'd had previous complaints about this host. At first, the representative avoided the question. But after a long pause, they admitted something that made my blood run cold. Yes, the host had been banned before. They had used a different name back then, but the profile had been flagged for the same kind of issue: hidden surveillance devices. The account had been deactivated, but they had come back using a different identity, different phone number, different email. The listing had slipped through the cracks. They told me they were taking steps to remove the account again and would report it to law enforcement. I asked if they had actually contacted the police. They told me they were in the process of doing so, which didn't sound promising. I kept the device. I wasn't sure what would come of it, but I didn't trust that anything would be done unless I followed up myself. I filed a report with the local police department in Tampa. It took a few tries to get someone who would listen. When I finally sat down with a detective, I handed over the device, explained everything again, and showed them my messages with Airbnb. The detective looked tired, like he'd seen this kind of thing more than once. He took the device, thanked me, and said they'd investigate it. I didn't get the sense that it was a priority, but at least it was documented. A few days later, back at home, I kept thinking about it. How many people had stayed there? How many had no idea they were being watched? Were those videos being uploaded somewhere? Shared? Sold? I posted my experience online, not to go viral, but because I didn't want anyone else walking into the same situation. I blurred out my personal info, but I included the pictures of the device, the placement in the room, and my messages with Airbnb. I didn't name the host, but I described the layout of the apartment and its location clearly enough that anyone else who stayed there would recognize it. The post got a lot of attention. People shared similar stories: other fake smoke detectors, hidden cameras in alarm clocks, behind vents, even in shampoo bottles. It made me realize this wasn't just a one-off creep. This was something that happened more than I had ever imagined. A few weeks later, someone messaged me privately. They said they had stayed at the same Airbnb a year earlier. It matched everything I described: the layout, the street, even the crooked lampshade. They had never noticed the camera. They thanked me for exposing it, said they felt sick to their stomach just thinking about it. That message stuck with me. I realized just how easy it is to assume privacy in places that aren't really private. How easily we put our trust in strangers because a platform says verified host or shows a few 5-star reviews. I still use Airbnb sometimes, but I'm much more cautious. I check every smoke detector now, every mirror, every outlet that looks even slightly out of place. I travel with a flashlight, scan for reflections, and bring my own carbon monoxide detector, the kind with no camera or card slot. Airbnb refunded me for the stay, which was the least they could do. They said they were investigating how the host got back on the platform. They promised they were tightening their verification process. Maybe they were, but it didn't undo what had happened. I don't know if the host was ever arrested. I never heard back from the police after the initial report. I followed up a few times, but it became clear it wasn't a priority for them. I even sent an email to a local news station, hoping maybe it would push the issue into the open. They never responded either, but at least I knew I had done something. I had pulled that camera off the ceiling before it could catch anything. I had warned others. I had documented it. And for now, that was all I could do. That trip changed how I look at places I stay in. Hotels, rentals, even friends' guest rooms. There's always a part of me that scans the walls and ceilings, wondering if something is hidden. I wish I didn't have to think like that, but after what I found in Florida, I know better. It only takes one person with bad intentions and one missed detail to turn a normal trip into something you never forget. And I won't forget. Not the blinking light, not the way the lens looked like it was staring straight at me, not the silence from Airbnb after the fact. Most of all, I won't forget the feeling that somewhere, someone might be watching people without them ever knowing, just waiting, recording, and how close I came to being one of them. We booked the place months in advance, an old Victorian home in Charleston that had been renovated into a short-term rental. There were 6 of us, all longtime friends from college, and we'd planned the trip as a kind of reunion. The house had everything we wanted: old charm, big bedrooms, close to the historic downtown, and just enough character in the photos to make it feel like an adventure. We got there late afternoon on a Friday. The house looked even better in person. Big wooden steps led up to a wide front porch with rocking chairs, and tall white columns framed the entryway. The inside had been updated, sure, but not too much. You could still see the age of the place in the hardwood floors, in the thick trim around the doors and windows, and especially in the creaky staircase that curved up to the second floor. The ceilings were high, and the light fixtures looked like they were original. It had that smell, too, old wood and something slightly musty, like a thrift store that had cleaned up real nice. The bedrooms were split between the 2 floors, and I picked the one at the top of the stairs, next to the bathroom. Everyone else dropped their bags and went out back to explore the little garden and patio. I took a moment to walk the hallway, just getting a feel for the place. That's when I noticed the mirror. It was full length, framed in dark wood, and mounted into the wall between 2 doors. It didn't stick out at first. Looked like the kind of thing you'd expect in a hallway, but something about it made me pause. The placement seemed off. It wasn't centered between the doors, more like squeezed into a spot that hadn't been made for it. And the wall around it was painted differently, like someone had touched it up recently. I didn't say anything. It wasn't like it was screaming for attention, just something I clocked and moved on from. The first night went as you'd expect. Drinks, music, laughter. We cooked dinner in the kitchen, which had been fully updated with new appliances and a marble island, then sat around outside under string lights someone had hung in the little garden. Later, we all crashed in our rooms, the floorboards groaning every time someone got up to use the bathroom. I passed that mirror a dozen times without thinking, but each time, I felt a little something I couldn't quite place. Cold, maybe, or like someone had just been standing there a second before. Again, nothing I could really point to, just an odd feeling in my gut that told me the mirror wasn't quite right. The second day, while everyone was out exploring shops and hitting a local bar, I stayed behind. I'd woken up with a pounding headache, probably from too much wine and not enough sleep. I made some coffee and wandered the house. The morning light came in through the tall windows, giving the place a soft glow. I ended up upstairs again, standing in front of that mirror. It was the cold that did it. The hallway was warm, sun pouring in from the window at the end, but right in front of the mirror, it felt like standing in front of an open fridge. No breeze, no air vent nearby, just a pocket of cold air. I reached out and touched the glass. It was colder than it should have been. Not just cool, cold. That's when the thought hit me. I don't even know where it came from. Maybe something I read years ago. The finger test. If you press your fingertip against a regular mirror, there should be a gap between your finger and the reflection. If it's a two-way mirror, like in interrogation rooms, your finger will touch its reflection directly. I held up my finger, touched the glass. No gap. My heart skipped a beat. I tried it again, same result. My fingertip met its reflection without space. I stood there for a while, just staring. The idea that someone could see through the other side of the mirror made my skin crawl. I looked around for tools. Ended up in the kitchen grabbing a butter knife. Back upstairs, I ran the blade along the edge of the mirror's wooden frame. It wasn't glued or screwed into place. It had hinges painted over. Panel, not a decoration. I hesitated before opening it. But then I thought, what if someone had been watching us? What if this house wasn't as clean as the listing made it look? I pried gently at the side, and the mirror swung open like a door. Behind it, a narrow, dark space stretched back into the wall. It was maybe 3 feet deep and ran the length of the mirror. First, it looked empty. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw the chair. It was a folding metal chair, the kind you see in church basements or school cafeterias. Right in front of it, a small pile of used tissues. A few empty energy bar wrappers scattered nearby. A bottle cap. The air smelled stale, like someone had been breathing in there for too long. I shut the mirror without going in. I backed down the hall, heart pounding, and went straight outside. I didn't tell the others at first. I didn't want to ruin the weekend or seem like I was losing it. But that night, when everyone was asleep, I couldn't stop thinking about the crawl space. Who had been in there? Was it someone from before the renovations? Or worse, was someone still using it? I didn't sleep well. Every creak of the house felt louder. I kept staring at the hallway through the crack in my door, half expecting the mirror to swing open by itself. The next morning, I told my friend Mark. I waited until the others had gone out for coffee and pulled him aside. He's not the kind of guy to overreact, which is why I picked him. He followed me upstairs, and I opened the mirror again to show him. His face went pale. We both stood there, staring into that crawl space. He stepped closer and took a photo with his phone. Then we saw something new. There was a small black device wedged into the top corner. It looked like a cheap motion-activated camera. Blinking red light. It had been on the whole time. We didn't touch it. We didn't go any further in. We shut the mirror, packed our bags, and told the others we had to leave early. Made up an excuse about a family emergency. We left that afternoon. When we got to a gas station outside town, Mark and I looked through the photos. There it was, the chair, the tissues, the wrappers, and the camera. We debated what to do. Call the owner? The cops? We weren't even sure if any laws had been broken. It wasn't in a bedroom. Maybe it was some leftover piece of the old house, something a contractor forgot. But that camera wasn't forgotten. It was on. Someone had put it there and kept it running. We decided to report it to AIRBNB directly. We sent them the photos, explained everything. They said they'd investigate and promised us a follow-up. We never heard anything again. A few weeks later, I checked the listing. It was gone. Not just booked, gone. No trace of it, no cached page, nothing. I did a reverse image search on one of the photos I'd saved from the listing. Found it re-uploaded under a new account with a slightly different address. Different photos, but it was the same house. Same porch, same curved staircase. But the hallway, the mirror was gone. In its place, just a painting of some coastal scene, like nothing had ever been there. I emailed AIRBNB again, got a canned reply. Eventually, I stopped looking. I wanted to forget the whole thing, but I couldn't. The idea of someone sitting behind that mirror, watching us, breathing in that little crawl space, eating energy bars while we laughed and cooked and slept just a few feet away. It stayed with me. It still does. I don't book Airbnb homes anymore. Hotels might be sterile and boring, but at least the walls don't open up. At least you know where the mirrors go. Every once in a while, I think about that chair. How long had it been there? Who used it last? And how many people had stayed in that house, never knowing someone was just behind the glass? And the worst part? I keep wondering if they ever found the camera. Because if they didn't, maybe it's still there. Maybe it's somewhere else now, watching someone else, waiting for the next guest to get just curious enough to touch the glass. We had been planning our getaway for months. My girlfriend, Sophie, and I had decided to rent a small, quiet Airbnb in the countryside of upstate New York for a much-needed break from the city. The photos on the listing were beautiful. An old farmhouse surrounded by wide-open fields, trees in every direction, and the kind of peace that we both craved. No neighbors for miles, or so it seemed. The host, a man named Tom, had given us all the details we needed before our arrival. He mentioned that he lived a few miles away, but would occasionally check in to make sure everything was fine. There was one thing he made sure to tell us that stuck out to me, though. One of the rooms in the house was locked for storage. At first, I thought it was a bit odd, but I didn't question it. It wasn't uncommon for people to lock a room if they didn't want guests to go in. It wasn't like we planned on snooping anyway. When we arrived, everything seemed as beautiful and serene as the photos. The house itself was old but well-maintained, and the views from the front porch were breathtaking. We unloaded our things and settled in. It was just the perfect escape. The air was crisp, the grass was green, and we spent the first evening enjoying the silence of the countryside, something we both loved after the constant noise of the city. That first night, as we were getting ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was late, probably past midnight, and Sophie was already sound asleep beside me. I was tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable, but I couldn't. There was this strange, subtle sound, like shuffling, coming from somewhere in the house. I wasn't sure where it was coming from at first. It wasn't a wind noise or anything from outside. It sounded almost like footsteps, but softer, almost like someone was moving around in the room next door. I told myself it was probably just the old house settling, a creak of the floorboards or a draft in the walls. Still, it bugged me enough to sit up and listen. Sophie was oblivious, deep in her sleep, but I couldn't ignore the noise. I got up quietly, thinking maybe I could find the source. The house was dark and quiet, and it felt almost too quiet. I walked through the living room and down the hall, my footsteps soft on the wooden floor. I passed the locked room, the one Tom had told us not to enter, and noticed that the door was ever so slightly ajar. That was strange. It had been locked when we arrived, and Tom had told us not to touch it. Why was it open now? I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at the small gap in the door. I hesitated, unsure of whether to open it all the way. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be inside. Storage, as Tom had said, or maybe something else entirely. The shuffling sound from earlier didn't help to ease my growing unease. I decided against opening the door, not wanting to invade someone's private space, but the curiosity gnawed at me. I turned around and went back to bed, trying to ignore the growing feeling of unease. But sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning, Sophie and I went about our usual routine. We made breakfast, enjoyed a cup of coffee on the porch, and talked about plans for the day. The shuffling sound was still in my mind, but I didn't want to bring it up to Sophie. She'd probably just tell me I was imagining things. I tried to shake it off, but something was nagging at me. After breakfast, Sophie suggested we take a walk around the property. I agreed, and we walked along the perimeter of the yard, taking in the views of the surrounding fields and distant woods. I didn't mention the door or the noises to her. I didn't want to make her paranoid, but my curiosity was building, and I found myself thinking about the locked room again. Later that afternoon, while Sophie was outside, I decided to take a quick look. I told myself it was harmless, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. I quietly approached the door to the locked room, pushing it open slightly further. The hinges creaked, and the door opened with an almost eerie slowness. My heart raced, but I told myself to just take a look and leave it at that. Inside, the room was small and dim, with light filtering in through a single window. The walls were bare except for a few pieces of furniture. There was an old, worn mattress in the center of the room, looking like it had been left there for years. But that wasn't what caught my attention. What really made my blood run cold was the baby monitor camera mounted on the wall, pointed directly at the bed where Sophie and I had slept the night before. The camera wasn't new. It looked like it had been there for a long time, with dust around the edges. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't quite organize. Who put that there? Why would it be pointed at our bed? I stepped further into the room, my stomach churning. As I looked around, I noticed something else. Used food wrappers scattered on the floor. There was no other explanation for them. They were clearly recent. My breath caught in my throat as I realized someone must have been in here while we were sleeping, watching us. My heart pounded in my chest. The room was small and there was nowhere to hide. There was no way someone could have snuck in without us hearing them. My eyes scanned the room frantically, trying to make sense of it all. But it didn't add up. I stepped back, too freaked out to think straight. The door shut behind me, and I stood there for a moment, trying to get my thoughts together. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to go to Sophie, but I didn't want to freak her out. Instead, I tried to act normal, walking back to the living room like nothing had happened. But my mind wouldn't stop racing. That camera, the food wrappers, everything about it was wrong. I waited for Sophie to return, hoping I could act like nothing was off. But when she came back, I could tell she sensed something was wrong. She asked me if I was okay, and I tried to brush it off, but she could tell I was on edge. I told her I had to go check something, and I rushed back to the locked room. The door was still ajar. My stomach dropped as I went inside once more, my heart beating faster. But this time, the mattress had been moved. It was no longer in the center of the room. The camera was gone. I felt my knees go weak as I stumbled backward. I didn't even think. I just ran out of the room, locked the door behind me, and rushed to find Sophie. When I found her, I told her everything. I could barely get the words out, but once I did, Sophie's face went pale. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We both knew we had to leave. We packed up our things quickly, trying to stay calm. I called Tom, explaining what we had found, but his response was cold and distant. He claimed he had no idea how the camera got there, and that the room had always been locked. I didn't believe him. I didn't care. All I wanted was to get out. We didn't stick around to hear any more excuses. We left immediately, not even bothering to stay another minute. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched the entire time. We got in the car and drove away, leaving the farmhouse behind us. I could feel the weight lifting off my chest as we put miles between us and that house. After we left, we reported everything to AIRBNB, detailing what we had found in that locked room. The investigation took a few weeks, but we were eventually contacted by the police. They had done a full search of the property and discovered hidden cameras in several areas of the house. Tom was arrested for stalking and voyeurism, and it turned out he had been renting the place out for months, using it as a cover for his disturbing activities. There were even more cameras hidden in the rooms where previous guests had stayed. It was a nightmare, but at least we were safe. Tom was convicted, and he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. I'll never forget that feeling of being watched, of knowing that someone had been in that room while we slept, monitoring us like we were nothing more than objects for his sick pleasure. I don't think I'll ever fully recover from the fear of that moment, but I'm just thankful we left when we did. I'm thankful we weren't another victim. I was on my second month of solo travel, and I had finally made it to Portland. I'd spent the last few weeks hopping from town to town along the West Coast, trying to stay within budget, but also find places that felt safe. I was tired of noisy hostels and overpriced hotels, so I went digging through Airbnb listings, hoping to find something cheap but not sketchy. Eventually, I landed on a basement unit tucked away in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of the city. The pictures looked fine. A clean little studio with a kitchenette, a private entrance, a small bathroom, and a big, cozy bed with neutral-colored sheets. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. The listing said, standalone unit, and emphasized privacy. The price was low, and the host had a few decent reviews. I booked 3 nights without thinking too much of it. When I arrived, it was already getting dark. The host had left instructions to enter through the side gate and go around to the back. The basement door was separate from the main house, which sat quiet and dark above. No cars in the driveway. I assumed maybe the host was out of town. I unlocked the door using the keypad code they'd sent and stepped inside. The place was cool and quiet. It had that kind of basement smell. Not bad, just a little musty, like old concrete. There was a couch in one corner with a folded blanket, a small TV, a table and 2 mismatched chairs, and a few overhead lights that flickered when I turned them on. Still, it was clean. Cleaner than a lot of other places I'd stayed. The fridge was empty and cold, and there were clean towels folded on the bathroom shelf. I dropped my backpack, locked the door behind me, and flopped onto the bed. That first night was uneventful. I cooked some noodles on the little hot plate, watched something stupid on my laptop, and fell asleep early. I remember waking up sometime in the night, not fully awake, just aware of a noise. Footsteps, light steady somewhere above me. I laid there in the dark, trying to decide if I'd really heard them or if it was just something in a dream. The listing had said it was a standalone unit. I took that to mean no one else was living upstairs. But old houses make noise sometimes, especially in the middle of the night. Pipes, creaks, maybe even squirrels or raccoons on the roof. I told myself it was nothing and drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I went for coffee and wandered around downtown. It was gray and rainy, typical Portland weather, and I loved it. I stopped by Powell's and spent a few hours there, then grabbed takeout and headed back to the Airbnb before dark. The walk from the nearest bus stop took me through quiet streets with trees arching over the sidewalks and little garden beds in front of most houses. The neighborhood felt calm, suburban even. Back at the basement, everything looked the same as I'd left it. The bed was made, my stuff untouched. No signs that anyone had been inside. But that night, the footsteps came again. This time I was fully awake. It was maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, and I'd just gotten up to use the bathroom. I was sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, pulling the blanket around my shoulders when I heard them. Clear, slow, unmistakable footsteps moving above me, back and forth as if someone were pacing. I sat completely still. The sound came in short bursts, a few steps, then silence. Then again. Not random creaks, not the house settling. Real steps. I grabbed my phone and opened the Airbnb app. I scrolled back through the listing and found the description. Private standalone basement unit. No shared spaces. Host lives off-site. I stared at the words for a while before finally sending a message. I kept it polite. Hi, just wanted to ask. Is anyone currently staying in the house above? I've been hearing footsteps at night and just wanted to double check. The reply came about 15 minutes later. Hi. Nope, you're the only guest and no one is upstairs. Probably just the house settling. It's an old building. Let me know if you need anything. I stared at that message for a long time. Something about the casual tone didn't sit right with me, but I didn't push it. I didn't want to be that guest, the paranoid one. I put my phone down and tried to sleep, but I kept waking up, hearing faint sounds above me or in the walls. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe there were raccoons in the attic. Maybe I was just on edge from traveling so much. I checked the locks twice before going to bed. Both the basement door and the bathroom had locks, and I started locking the bathroom door at night, even though I wasn't sure why. Just a gut feeling. The third night is when things really shifted. I had spent most of the day at a park, journaling and people watching. When I got back to the Airbnb, I felt uneasy. Not for any obvious reason. It was still early evening, the sun not quite down yet. But when I stepped inside, the air felt off, like someone had been in there. Nothing looked touched. Nothing was missing. But I felt it, that gut feeling again. I tried to brush it off, but I kept checking over my shoulder. I reheated some leftovers and forced myself to eat, though I wasn't hungry. Around 9 p.m., I locked up tight, turned on every light, and got into bed with a book. I wasn't even pretending to relax anymore. I must have fallen asleep around midnight. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up again. But this time, it wasn't footsteps that woke me. It was the sound of a door slowly opening. It was faint but close, the kind of sound you know instantly when you hear it in the dark. The old basement door creaking open, and I knew for a fact I had locked it before bed. My stomach dropped. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just listened. The creaking stopped. Silence. Then soft, slow steps on the basement floor. Inside the unit, I was no longer alone. I moved as quietly as I could, grabbing my phone off the nightstand. I didn't turn on the screen. I didn't want the light to give me away. I slid off the bed and tiptoed to the bathroom, locking the door behind me as gently as possible. The bathroom was tiny, barely big enough to turn around in, but it had a solid door with a decent lock. I sat down on the cold floor and turned on my phone. I didn't hesitate. I called 911. I whispered to the dispatcher, explaining that I was staying in an Airbnb and someone had just entered the basement. I gave them the address and told them I was locked in the bathroom. She told me to stay on the line and keep quiet. I heard her typing, repeating things back to me, her voice calm. She said officers were already on the way. I sat there, frozen, heart pounding. I didn't hear anything else outside the bathroom. No more footsteps, just silence. It was the worst kind of silence. Heavy, thick, and filled with the possibility that someone was just on the other side of the door, listening. It felt like forever before I heard the faint knock on the basement door and a muffled voice announcing themselves as police. I stayed put until I heard boots on the stairs, then someone shouting down, asking if anyone was inside. I unlocked the bathroom and came out shaking, still holding my phone. 2 officers were in the basement now, flashlights sweeping the room. They asked me if I was okay. I nodded, still in shock. One of them went to check the main door. It was unlocked. They asked me if anything was missing or if I'd seen anyone. I told them I'd locked that door myself and woken up to it opening. One of the officers walked the perimeter of the unit, tapping on the walls. He stopped near the far corner, by the utility closet. Then he opened it. Inside was a hatch leading to the crawl space under the stairs. They pulled it open and shined a light in. A few minutes later, they found him. A man in his early 20s, curled up in the crawl space, trying to stay quiet. He looked dirty, shaken, and thin. The officer handcuffed him and led him upstairs. I stood there in shock, watching as they questioned him outside. One of the officers stayed back with me, explaining things slowly. The man was the host's son. He'd apparently been living in the crawl space for weeks, maybe months. He wasn't listed on the Airbnb account. The host had claimed to live off-site, but it turned out he owned several properties and didn't keep close tabs on this one. His son had a history of drug issues and had been squatting in the house. At night, he'd been slipping into the basement through the crawl space, probably looking for food or valuables. The host had known his son was troubled, but hadn't realized he was using the property. I gave a full statement, and the police stayed until I packed my things and left. I didn't care that it was 4 in the morning. I called a rideshare and went to a hotel near downtown. It was overpriced and noisy and bright, but I didn't care. I slept with the lights on, fully clothed, door chained shut. The next day, the host messaged me apologizing, offering me a full refund and a free stay at any of his other properties. I didn't respond. I reported the listing to Airbnb and sent them the police report. The listing disappeared a few days later. I didn't stay in any more Airbnbs after that. For the rest of the trip, I stuck to well-known hotels, even if it cost more. I still think about that basement sometimes.